it's Ricor from RicoRLessons. This is another tutorial on the drums. Today I'm going to be talking about soloing in genres and soloing in different genres. There's kind of multiple different ways to do this. I'm just kind of basically just give a really kind of brief layout of how this process works, because every genre kind of has its own bass, and I'll just go through like the main genres and kind of talk about the foundation for your solos and kind of where that comes from. And you know, as always throughout this video, if you want to pause it, try stuff yourself, please do. I don't do a lot of soloing tutorials. This tutorial will be primarily about soloing as a concept, which is kind of its own art form within itself. And in future videos, I'll talk more about kind of soloing and how to solo and what soloing really is. Right now, I'm just kind of talking about the genres themselves, how to solo in each genre, and what that actually means. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first genre I'll talk about is rock. I'll talk about rock, jazz, rap, swing, which is kind of its own genre, and Latin. So those are going to be so rock, jazz, swing, and Latin. And actually let's do funk too. So rock, funk, jazz, swing, and Latin. I'll just go through those. So rock first. Rock soloing, very heavy. Rock as a genre is very heavy. So the way I'll do this is, because in order to really understand a basic solo, you have to understand the grooves that kind of go with it. So I'll go through a basic groove for each genre, then I'll talk about a solo behind it. So a basic rock groove, your really standard money beat, you know, you hear this all over the place. It's an example of this. You have very standard 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So one more time, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the standard rock groove. So a lot of times rock solos will always be in 4/4. If the groove is in 4/4, the solo is in 4/4. The solo will always correspond to whatever the time signature is. So as long as you know your time signature, where your solo kind of goes is really going to be vital, very important. So it's always going to be in 4/4. So we have this basic groove, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have that concept. An example of a rock solo would be the following. So I'm going to just basically go off the groove and solo. So groove, and then there's an idea, and I'm just doing really basic kind of outline solos here, just to kind of, for the sake of time and for the sake of sewing, just kind of an example. So basically, that's an example of a rock solo. So your snare is going to be very heavy. Your cymbal is going to be prevalent. In rock, it's always the snare and the cymbals that are very prevalent, very heavy, very straightforward. So there's going to be a lot of very kind of heavy movements. Kick will be very prevalent as well. So you have a lot of that going on, a lot of really heavy fills. So that's your rock. Next, let's move on to jazz, and actually I'm going to do jazz once again, just kind of swing, and then jazz more kind of in the funk world, and then jazz more in the kind of Latin world. So we'll talk about those three, and then I'll talk about rap at the end of the video. So jazz. So jazz is in a lot of ways the opposite of rock, kind of through, just kind of different facets of the genre. What you're focusing on in jazz will oftentimes be the opposite. So instead of a lot of hard-hitting forward motions like we had, like I just talked about with the rock solo, so instead of a lot of that type of idea, you're going to be doing a lot of very subtle work. Very subtle, for example. So that kind of more kind of subdued, very dynamic. Jazz is way more dynamic than rock overall. In jazz, of course, you have your different, depending on the genre of jazz, everything's usually very calm. If we're doing a swing, for example, so oftentimes jazz, you won't even use sticks. I'm using sticks right now in this video, but also, you can use rods, you can use brushes. So you have a groove like this. That's your basic swing groove. A solo over top of that will put a lot of emphasis on keeping that hi-hat steady. So a very kind of laid back concept, always laid back. So very laid back on the hi-hat. And very laid back on the cymbal, and you're kind of keeping that foundation a lot more. A rock solo, you can go a lot more crazy and kind of use fills kind of primarily throughout the whole solo. But with a swing solo, for instance, we're talking about swing right now, you always want to go back to your foundation. So oftentimes a swing solo will have a lot of space because you're always kind of going back to that foundation. So for example, here's a basic swing groove. So going from its solo into from this, for instance, would be so this. And then, you're just basically always keeping your hi-hat steady, and then whatever fills, whatever choices you make will always kind of come back to your foundation. That's very different from rock, where once again, because the count is kind of implied in rock, you can go a lot more crazy, but with swing, you always want to keep that foundation. Latin, same concept. So Latin, basic bossa groove. We'll talk about the bossa groove in another video. I'm not breaking down grooves in this video, I'm just talking about solos. But yeah, bossa groove. If you're going from something like that, a solo, oftentimes you could have your snare off because bossas are replicating percussion, replicating auxiliary, so you're replicating congas and all that. So it's going to be a lot of, depending on the song, but it's very musical, making choices very musically. Same idea, you're keeping that kick going in a bossa solo. So if I go from the groove, once again, making musical choices is kind of using that foundation of keeping it going. The reason for that is because bossa and swing are based off of what's called a basic foundation in grooves. So essentially, the band will be relying on, in the case of swing, the hi-hat. In the case of bossa, the dum-dums, dum-dum, the kind of the tumbao beat on the kick, which drives everything forward. So that's why those grooves will have a lot more kind of, when you're soloing over top of them, you're going to need a lot more of that foundation. Lastly, funk. Funk is the closest to rock, without actually being rock, I would say. It's the second genre that's almost rock, but not quite. Biggest difference between funk and rock. Rock, very forward, very in your face. Funk, using a lot of the same methods, but a lot more musical. So if I'm going to give you an example of a funk groove, if I just move it forward here. So a funk groove on the drum set, for example, would be, so I have rock, which would be, heavy hi-hat, heavy depending on the genre, but heavy, very heavy in your face overall. Funk, putting a lot more emphasis on hi-hat musicality and snare musicality versus straightforward driving pulse. So once again, rock, straightforward driving pulse. Funk, a lot more kind of musical. So that's just kind of a 2-second example of both genres. So a funk genre, because of that, will be a lot more musical. You're going to use a lot of the same elements. You can go kind of do the same type of thing where you can kind of basically create space or like fill space for a lot of it. But it's going to be a lot more musical. So once again, in rock, a lot of it's about filling space, a lot of it's about driving force. But with funk, I'm going to use Chameleon, the Herbie Hancock tune, as a foundation. So. The biggest difference there is I'm going back to the foundation a lot more too. So it's basically like with rock, you can go crazy the whole time. With funk, similar to jazz, bossa, you always want to kind of go back to your foundation. That's how I would break down the biggest difference between those genres. And, a lot of this really does also depend on the tune, depends on what you need for the song. So this is just a very kind of general explanation, but that should help kind of overall get an idea. So last but not least, let's go into rap and the rap genre just real quick. And, this is kind of a really quick rundown of genres. If you guys want to know more about each genre, please comment down below. I'll make more videos talking about each genre. I'm also making a lot of covers on this channel talking about different genres. So, you know, genres, I go kind of all over the place. A lot of my stuff right now is a lot of rock and a lot of jazz. I'm going to do more jazz. It's a lot of rock right now, but I'm going to branch out more too. You know, I have my preferences personally, but so you guys will see me do a lot more genres. I'll talk a lot more kind of about individual genre groups too in this on this channel in the future. So, but right now, let's just focus real quick on rap. So rap is it's the drumming for rap is based off of EEDS, you know, EEDS, which is kind of the concept of electric drum sets, you know, E-kits, EEDS. So what you're doing is going to be very steady. It's going to be very much based off of whatever the rhyme is. So an example of a rap group, one of my favorites is The Monster by Eminem. So that would be... So once again, I'm kind of doing an E-kit. So it's very, very, very simple. You're basically creating that electronic illusion with an acoustic setting. Just picking a groove and going with it. Very little ghostings, very little fills, just sticking with the foundation of the line. It's a great drum line. I love that song. But anyway, so that's kind of an example. So a solo off of a rap, in a rap song, if you're gonna have like a solo in a rap song, which sometimes will happen, you know, solos can happen in any genre. I mean, you know, there's definitely the times where like it would be probably less common to do it in a rap versus other genres, but it can still happen. So as an example, once again, you're using that foundation. If I'm gonna solo over top of that, it can be very fast. The solo will match the tone. And once again, rap is all about kind of keeping the very foundation beat, not going with a lot of fills. So if you're soloing, because you have to do fills to solo, your solo will still kind of have to match that very straightforward idea of the groove. So versus other genres like funk, rock, where you can kind of go a little more kind of all over the place and experiment, a rap solo would be very straightforward, very much. So I'm just kind of picking a fill and just kind of going with that concept. So, you know, once again, I mean, you know, there's a lot of kind of small intricacies when I'm talking about, especially between rock, funk, rap. You know, those are ones that it's maybe a little harder to really tell the difference, even just right now with me explaining it. So I'm trying my best to kind of give a little bit of an idea. But the more you listen to all these genres, the more these little differences will really kind of come into play, because a lot of what I'm talking about really does come from just listening to the tracks, really understanding the tracks. But that's a really quick rundown of soloing in genres. Once again, I'm going to make more videos on different genres. Please check out my previous tutorials. I'm making a lot of tutorials right now for individual songs. So you guys, please check that out. And thank you so much for watching. And also check out my solo artist channel, record music. I have my original music and all that stuff up there. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.